All right, we're live. Awesome. Great. I want to welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. And I want to thank Joe Londa from New Paltz. Joe really reached out and set this up and good work you've done to help us all out. So we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Joe. A couple quick things. We are invited, anybody that would like to Long Island to view one of these battery energy storage systems. I put the flyer in the back, so everybody should be able to have one. We have three speakers tonight. Jeffrey Seidman, who's here. I'm not going to go over their bios. They're on the agenda. Bill Oberker, who's not here yet. He's in a little bit of traffic, but you may be able to.
I might be able to call her. My name is Veronica. I
Okay.
work with Bell.
It's all good. Yes, and thank you. And Paul Rogers. Where's Paul? Paul, yeah. So thanks, Paul. And we appreciate their time. They've all given up. They're busy doing this now, and they came up to help us out. So I do want to have County Executive Jen Metzger. Thanks for coming. You want to say a couple words quick?
Well, I actually just want to thank you, Rich, and the Supervisors Association for sponsoring this because, knowledge is power. This is, a big issue now in our county and statewide. It's, an important, actually essential technology for transitioning to a clean grid, but we also have to make sure that everyone has confidence in it because that it's safe. And yeah, it's important to hear from experts. So thanks everyone for being here. And I look forward to learning myself.
Thank you. All right, so Jeffrey, we're going to give you the floor. Okay, I'm going to just move here. I'll get out of your way.
Yeah, you're fine.
I'm just trying to get the camera set up on the slides so people at home can watch it. There you go.
Okay. Thanks, Supervisor Reddy, very much for organizing this. I'm Jeff Seidman. I teach at Vassar College, but I'm here very much just as a resident of the Hudson Valley to share what I know. In a few minutes, either Bill or Veronica from NYSERDA is going to speak, and Paul Rogers from ESRG, and I think they're the main course. They're going to talk about fire safety, which is I think what most people are most concerned about and want to hear most about, and about siting considerations. I'm going to talk about something else. I'm going to try to answer the question, why are we talking about this all of a sudden now at all? Why is this all of a sudden, at this moment, are grid scale batteries an issue? The battery systems that we're going to talk about, this is a slide I stole from NYSERDA, are big ones on the right. That's to say commercial scale ones that are big enough to support the grid. But you see them on this slide next to a residential battery or a battery of the scale that might back up a business. We're going to talk about the big ones. But the important thing to know is they're all basically the same thing. They are the same cells assembled together in bigger and bigger and bigger packages, right? And they are, for that matter, more or less the same cells that we all carry around in our pockets, in our cell phones, in our laptops, in all our devices. They can be, so we're going to talk about the big commercial ones that are big enough to support the grid. They can be co-located with renewables so that, for instance, solar power can keep providing power after the sun goes down. That's really important, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the use case where they are standalone, usually located next to an electrical substation. So the question is, why are we talking about batteries assembled together into packages this big all of a sudden? Well, let's start with prices. A decade ago, batteries cost more than $700 for a kilowatt hour. Now they cost around $135, and the price is still plummeting every single year. The reason for this is that battery cells are like computer chips. We make them in factories over and over and over again. And the more we make, the better we get at making them. So with each year, the underlying technology improves, the systems engineering wrapped around it improves, and the processes, the manufacturing processes improve, with the result that batteries every single year are getting cheaper and better and safer. So, like I said, these are the same batteries that you have in your cell phone. And you can remember 10, 15 years ago, you would occasionally read a news story about someone's phone catching fire. You don't read those stories anymore, right? And that's despite the fact that now billions of people have phones in their pocket, where that wasn't true 15 years ago. And the reason is we have gotten so much better at making these things. So as prices have plummeted, it's made deploying batteries in these really big packages, big enough to support the grid, more and more affordable. And deployment is now taking off exponentially. It's invisible to most of us, but a real revolution is happening right now in how the electrical grid operates. And you can see states like Texas and California and Florida are ahead of the curve, right? It's just barely getting started. You can see in New York, as the saying goes, the future is here, but it is not evenly distributed yet, right? So why? Why is this happening? Why do grid operators want to deploy batteries so much? The reasons boil down to two main factors. The first is economics. They help the grid operate more efficiently and less expensively. And the second is resilience. They help keep the lights on. I'm going to talk mostly about economics, and there are actually lots of ways in which batteries support the grid economically, make it more efficient. But I'm just going to talk about two of them. The first is providing access to cheaper power. This is a role that batteries can play everywhere, but it's more important in the Hudson Valley than most places. To see why, you have to know that in New York, we have essentially, functionally, two separate power grids. In northern and western New York, the grid is overwhelmingly supplied by clean and cheap sources of generation. So think hydropower from Niagara, also from Quebec, think a growing amount of wind power, a little bit of solar, and nuclear. Right? The black lines on the map represent high voltage transmission lines. Those are the things you see on the big 150-foot tall metal lattice towers, which shuttle bulk power around the state. You can think of them as like the interstate highway for electricity. But you can see the yellow lines there in the middle of the map that are called the central east constraint. Those are places where the transmission lines that we have just aren't big enough, right, to carry as much power as we need. They are more like a two-lane highway. That means that when there's high demand for electricity in our part of the state, in the Hudson Valley, down to New York City and Long Island, we can't import enough power from upstate because the lines are full. They are, as we say, congested. So what do? We have to fire up gas and oil power plants located in the Hudson Valley, down in the city, like the Danskamer plant near Newburgh. These power plants make our air significantly more polluted every day. And because the geography of the Hudson Valley traps pollution, they contribute to the Hudson Valley actually having some of the highest asthma rates in the country. But they're also just really expensive to run compared to the clean power that is available upstate. So this is the result. This is a screenshot I took a little while ago from New York ISO's day-ahead market. This is the wholesale power market where utilities like Central Hudson go to buy electricity on our behalf, and then they just pass that cost through to customers. So the market is divided into zones. We're in zone G. And you can see that on the day that I took this screenshot, at least, upstate electricity at that time was $12, $15 a megawatt hour, but we were paying more than twice as much because we have to pay to fire up expensive oil and gas power plants because we can't get the power that is available upstate, right? That shows up in the portion of our bills, of our electric bills, called supply charges, which utilities like Central Hudson just pass right through to customers, right? Here's how batteries solve this problem. At night, demand for power is low. People are sleeping, businesses and factories are mostly closed, and so there is plenty of spare capacity on those transmission lines, including those yellow lines, the Central East constraint. So we can locate batteries at electrical substations up and down the Hudson Valley. Batteries suck up cheap, clean power from upstate overnight when those lines are empty, when they're not congested. And then, during the day, instead of having to fire up expensive oil and gas power plants like Dan's camera, we discharge those batteries into local distribution grids. We get cleaner air and cheaper power. This saves us money pretty much any day of the year, but where it really shines is on extreme days. So you guys probably remember June 24th was when it touched 100 degrees all over the state of New York. And as everyone turned up their air conditioners, demand for electricity was higher than grid operators had forecast. So by 10:30 in the morning, the price in the Hudson Valley was around $120. By 3:40 in the afternoon, it was $1,255. And by 5:57, we were on the edge of widespread, dangerous power outages. And grid operators had to pay facilities like hospitals to fire up their diesel generators, to feed power into the grid so that we didn't get power outages. The wholesale price of power spiked to $2,500 in the Hudson Valley and $7,300 on Long Island. For many households, paying for that price spike is a real hardship. So price spikes like this are unusual in New York because our market is structured to try to prevent them, right? And usually succeeds. Texas's market is structured differently, and it allows price spikes like that much more frequently. And until a couple of years ago, they were really, really common. But then something happened. So you can see price spikes on the left were in August of 2023, and then a year later in August of 2024, and then August of 2025. And the summer of August in 2025 was actually hotter than the previous two summers, more demand on the grid. How did Texas tame these price spikes? They did it by building boatloads of batteries all over the state. Right? Whenever prices start to rise, these batteries sell their power into the grid, and they cut off that spike before it happens. So that is one way that batteries save us money. There's a second one. Batteries, a big part of our bill, are complement to supply charges, are delivery charges. That's the cost of building and maintaining the transmission lines, the generators, the transmission lines, the substations, transformers, and other grid infrastructure that delivers the power actually to our doors. For the last couple of years, last couple of decades, demand for electricity in New York and across the US has been more or less flat. And so we've only had to pay to maintain existing grid infrastructure. But in the last couple of years, demand has started to rise sharply across the country. And it is projected to keep rising so that peaks in 2040 will be about 2 times what peaks are today. In 2050, 2.5 times. That's specific to New York, those figures. This has really, really big implications for us.
You're on here.
I am. That seems like
It's moving.
must be the
I'm
connection.
afraid to touch this.
I have no idea.
Let me see.
I would like the slides if it's possible, because
Maybe the Projector went to sleep or something.
Let me turn it on. Now, let me turn it back on. That's probably, it's back on now.
Turn it off and turn it on. That's
Always works.
Reboot. It's back
Thank
on
you.
now.
I can look at it.
Let's give it a sec.
It should come right back up. I may have to connect it. It'll come up. Come on. I don't know if it's overheated. Come on. It's definitely on. Just give it a second. There we go. I'm connected back to it, so you can take it. You want to take a question?
Yeah, I'll take a question in the
Any
meantime.
questions?
Anyone questions in the meantime?
While we're waiting for it to come up?
What's the impact of that line you're running from Canada to New York City?
It'll help a little bit, but not that much. It's a gigawatt, which is a good amount of power, right? It was the process of putting that line in started 23 years ago, right? That's how long it took to get built, right? By the time you go through all the permitting. So it'll help a little bit, mostly in the city, right? But it's not nearly enough. And it's like a perfectly good question is like, why don't we just build more transmission? That's what we should do. It is what we should do. But it 23 years to get Chippy from when it was proposed to when it was fully built. Chippy is the Champlain Hudson Power Express. All right. Okay. There's a little something cut off on the right, but it doesn't really matter. On the
I'll
left,
fix that. No.
it doesn't matter. Okay. I'm going to go back to this and then happy to. Okay. So I was saying we need to, we pay for grid infrastructure. Grid infrastructure, the peak is going up, and they need to size grid infrastructure. Utilities need to size grid infrastructure for peaks. The peak hours of a year, not even that, the peak hours of a decade or so. Because if you don't have the capacity to meet that peak, you can have devastating and cascading power outages, right? So the power is the infrastructure is sized not for most hours of the year, but that for that couple of hours, that 6 p.m. on June 24th when it's 100 degrees and everyone's got their AC on. So to accommodate peaks growing 2 or 2.5 times what they are now, with the business as usual approach, right? You'd need to double the capacity of just about every piece of equipment you see on that diagram. And it would be extraordinarily, enormously expensive, right? And we're already beginning to see this. Power prices, not just in New York, but all over the country, are going up sharply just in the last couple of years. And that is projected to continue for decades to come. And there are studies as to why this is happening, and there are a bunch of factors, but the studies agree that the single biggest factor in all of this is the need to upgrade transmission and distribution lines. Right? That is the single biggest driver of these sharp rate increases that we are all feeling. And this is expected to keep climbing, again, for decades to come if we don't do something different. But there's another way. Suppose, as we were talking about before, we put batteries next to existing substations up and down the Hudson Valley and charge them up, as we were talking about before, during off-peak hours when existing grid capacity is there and is underutilized. Then, when demand peaks, we use the capacity of the existing transmission lines, substations, transformers, and all the rest, and we discharge the batteries to send additional power just over that last mile for homes and businesses. We can meet much higher peaks without prohibitively expensive grid upgrades. We still need some upgrades, right? But because we make much better use of existing grid infrastructure by using it when it is now underutilized, right? In those off-peak hours. And as a bonus, this makes the grid much more resilient so that we're less likely to have power outages during extreme weather, right? That's exactly what happened in Texas. They reduced the risk of blackouts as calculated by ERCOT, that's the grid operator in Texas. In a single year, they reduced the risk of summer blackouts from 12% to 1% by building all those batteries, right? So building out batteries like this to keep costs down and improve resilience is exactly the strategy that NYSERDA has proposed in its energy storage roadmap. But whether or not this happens is not up to NYSERDA. It's not up to the state. It is in the hands of local decision makers, the people in this room. In order to play a big role in the grid, batteries need to be widely distributed across it, not concentrated in just a few locations. The permitting and siting decisions of local leaders will either enable this strategy or block it. It's up to our town boards and city councils to decide whether or not the benefits of this strategy outweigh the kinds of concerns that Mr. Oberker and Lieutenant Rogers will talk about. So 3 takeaways, and then I'm done. No matter what we do, the grid will be changing over coming decades because demand for electricity is rising rapidly and will continue to rise. If we don't use the tools of a modern grid, including battery systems, we will face steep and persistent electricity rate increases for decades. Installing batteries up and down the Hudson Valley gives us access to power that is cheaper, cleaner, and more reliable. Okay, that's me. I'll hand it over to Bill Oberker.
So we'll be able to take questions at the end, okay? We'll let the 3 gentlemen speak and then we'll, so I'm gonna go to the next one. So Bill, can Bill borrow your,
Yes.
just give me a second here. I think I can. Okay, Bill, can I ask you a little favor?
Sure.
Can you go on that side? Because I have the camera close to the screen and that way people watching at home can see you. Yeah, right in that area is perfect. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Bill Oberker. I'm a program manager on NYSERDA's Clean Energy Siting team. I'm going to speak a little bit to the work of Governor Hochul's Interagency Fire Safety Working Group, and then some of the code development process that we go through here in New York. First, it should be a surprise to no one at this point that in New York State we had 3 energy storage system fires in the span of 2 months in the summer of 2023. One in late May of 2023 on Eastern Long Island. Second one in Warwick, New York, in the Hudson Valley. And the third one at the end of July of 2023 in the Thousand Islands area in Chimo. So these were the first 3 energy storage system fires in the state of New York. They were also the first time that much capacity, I think anywhere in the country, or no anywhere in the country, had gone up in that rapid succession. So that, set of unique circumstances drives Governor Hochul to convene the Interagency Fire Safety Working Group. The agency participants were the kind of central thrust of the working group. All the agencies that you see there, DISHES, OFPC, Department of State, Department of Public Service, NYSERDA, they were chosen carefully. This wasn't something where we threw, cut up letters, throw them in a hat, and we just, whichever one's landed on the table, that's who the working group was. Myself, David Sandbag, and a couple of my other colleagues were on the phone the night of the Chimo fire until I think 1:30 or 2 in the morning, which happened to be my birthday as well, which was a fun little present for me. Figuring out who should be involved, why they need to be involved, what their role is in the working group, what we need them to do, what we need from them. So this is night 1 of the working group. And I'd like to tell that part of the story just to really set the stage for what we've done with the working group. Everything was done with that level of intent. the intentionality, kind of the meticulous thinking, making sure that we weren't doing things to check a box, making sure that we weren't doing things because it looked good, making sure that we were doing things that needed to be done. We only were pursuing things of substance in the working group in its early years. In addition to the agencies, we had a group of highly specialized subject matter experts. So the first fire was in May of 2023. In April of 2023, we had just gotten Paul Rogers and his group, BSRG, under contract to be the state's main subject matter expert on energy storage fire safety. So 1 month between the first fire and when that contract went into place. One of the most serendipitous experiences of my life, by a lot. So we had Paul and his team there. We also had folks at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, Sandia National Labs, New York Power Authority, the Long Island Power Authority, who were all just very willing to help us, and we were willing to accept that help as well. So very quickly, we kind of came up with a rough draft of what this working group was going to do, and that's really what you see here. This was the first kind of idea, again, from that first night. First, we wanted to collect all of the environmental testing data that had been taken at all of those sites. Because in 2023, we had fears of toxic smoke and PFAS contamination, soil contamination. But we had absolutely no evidence to either justify those claims or to address those. So the information just wasn't really there at the time. So we knew that going into these fires, and because of that, there was testing done at all of them. We were aware that there was testing done. Now we just had to go herd the cats to get the test results and all of that data in a centralized place, evaluate it, and release it. So that was the first thing we did. The last fire was in July 27th. We released that on December 23rd of the same year. The folks that worked with government, you will understand that that is lightning speed for a cadre of government agencies that. So that was kind of the level that we were operating at out of the gate. The second thing we knew we needed to do was a code standards and regulations review. So we understood that New York had the leading regulations in place at the time, and that was the 2021 NFPA 855. That was New York's code. We were the first one to have that. That was May 2020. California was next in July of 2021. New York was well over a year ahead of who's typically considered to be the national leader in renewable development on this issue. A lot of the work that went into the development of that code was done by Paul and the team at FDNY before there were any lithium-ion standards anywhere. So we also had those folks who came up with some of the first lithium-ion specific regulations in the country, if not the world, advising us. And these were all things that we kind of didn't realize would be in place after our first fire, nor did we realize there would be three. So we thought we were in pretty good shape to just do a review of the updated standards. So I said 21 855. At that time, 2023 855 had been released in a draft form, so we had a good idea of where it was going. There were some folks on Paul's team and other teams who were also sitting on those committees, so we had insights into where those national standards were going as well. And then the International Fire Code, the 2024 version, which is what New York's code is based on directly. We'll get into that a little bit more. We knew there was another version of that available as well. So the idea was to take our current, which were the dominant standard at the time, take our current rules and regulations, do a side-by-side comparison with all the updates and with New York City's fire code, and just see, where are the holes, if any, and how do we close those holes. So that's what we did with the fire code recommendations. I'll get into that a little bit further on. And then the last thing we kind of figured out on the first night was we should do a reinspection of the existing fleet of energy storage systems in service throughout the state above a certain size threshold. That brought us to about 60 projects that we were able to reinspect within 1 year. So, on night one, we have our work cut out for us. Here's where we are today. We did, as I said, release all of those findings from the environmental contamination data within a couple months of collecting them. If folks don't know, our results here in New York were consistent with all of the results that have been gathered from field testing data all over the country. And that is to say there is nothing that was detected that even approaches the level of harm to human health that is consistent across every one of these live events throughout the country. I don't blame folks for not necessarily understanding that, because there are a lot of places that you could look that would have you believe otherwise. I am here to tell you that all of that stuff that you see is not based in the raw data that was collected and released at those fires. Yes, that includes Moss Landing. EPA just came to Long Island and even said there was nothing at the Moss Landing fire that approached the level of human harm in the air, the soil, or the water. So that is important to clear up. New York's results were consistent with all of the other results that have been collected to date in this country. Second, we issued the fire code recommendations. The first draft of that was February 2024. Department of State and the New York State Code Council took the working group's recommendations and turned them into draft code language by that summer. There was a year of comment by summer of 2025, this July. The Code Council voted to adopt the new code, which contains all of those regulations from the Fire Safety Working Group. They will go into effect statewide January 1st. Right now, we are in an interim period where project applicants are able to opt into the new code or choose to abide by the current code. Everyone who industry is getting advice from in New York State is advising them to just go with the new code right now. And the other thing I think that's important to understand about that, if somebody approaches you with a project right now, development timelines for these projects are such that you would never see a project get evaluated for code compliance before January. That is not going to happen. So basically, if it's not something already sitting on your desk, it's going to be subject to the 2025. Even if there is something sitting on your desk, there's a good chance that it's not going to clear the development hurdles in front of code compliance by January 1st. 57 inspections. The results were largely minor. What we found was mostly just improper upkeep, and the developers, when notified about what we found, typically within 24 hours to a week, came through, fixed everything they needed to fix with their system, and so that's proof that they did that. Most of it was stuff like, there's a cardboard box that's sitting too close to one of these containers. We don't want combustibles within 10 feet at least. So that was typically what we saw. A lot of other stuff was just kind of overgrown vegetation. So we don't want a cardboard box within 10 feet on the ground. We also don't want a tree limb hanging, especially at this time of year, above the system either. So stuff like that, just general site maintenance. I think we're at about 98% of the things that were identified through this have been rectified the last time we checked. So we pretty much, cleared everything out that was an issue in those re-inspections. And importantly, use those re-inspections to inform the work of the working group, including the fire code recommendations. We did a statewide webinar in May 7th. For communities, just to do the deep dive into what the fire safety working group had done, why we had done it, what we had found, what we had learned. That is available on the fire safety working group website on NYSERDA's page. To anyone who wants to listen to me talk for 2 hours after this, you have some trouble getting sleep at some point during the week, it'll send you right off. And then outstanding, we have accessing root cause analysis. So we have one root cause analysis out of the 3 fires. And that was one of the biggest issues that we found, actually, is that root cause analysis are typically proprietary documents that are owned by the manufacturer, and those people do not want to part with it. So that is one thing that we've been working on at the state level, is to find ways to compel industry to give them to us so that we don't have to rely on asking nicely and crossing our fingers. We did not view that as something that is sustainable. So we have a series of different things that have come up throughout the state where we can kind of catch these documents. Even though we have one root cause analysis document, we have a pretty solid understanding of what happened in all 3 fires. We have an NDA negotiated for one of the other ones. There's litigation around that. We don't know when that litigation is going to end. We are pretty sure that we are not going to receive that document while there is open litigation. So there's another kind of issue with these documents. That said, we do have a pretty good idea of what happened, because even if folks were not necessarily as cooperative as we would have liked them to be with turning over the proprietary documents, they were very cooperative with us in terms of getting on the phone and explaining to us what happened and why it won't happen again, which is the least we could ask, and they did do that pretty well. Finally, toward the end of this experience, we're going to compile everything that the working group has done into one massive report, send it to FDNY, the national labs, and other relevant stakeholders for review. And then I think the goal is to release that report. I would say that we could expect that probably within 12 to 18 months from right now. But with all those agencies, reviews and approvals can get quite time consuming. So it's really hard to try to put a number on when any of these things are going to come out, because we've got sometimes 20 people are reviewing these 50-page documents and redlining them for you to approve it. It takes a while. But that will be the final thing from the working group, is a final report. We don't have some level of familiarity with the code recommendations from the fire safety working group, just by show of hands. Okay. So I'm going to go through those. Those are all captured right here. I believe we will circulate these slides to folks. Is that right? So you'll be able to take some time with this. I'm not going to hit everyone and explain it, because I would hope folks to be awake for when Paul comes up. First, I think, is the most important one, requiring independent peer reviews for all projects. So one of the things that we noticed through the re-inspections and the document collection that we did was we can't necessarily count on New York's authorities having jurisdiction, or permitting authorities, in every one of our 1,600 jurisdictions to have a lithium-ion expert on staff. It's not a realistic expectation. So what we had done to address that in the first time around in the codes was we had a peer review clause giving the permitting authority the power to require that the developer pay for an independent design review for code compliance. What we found during those re-inspections is that should have been happening a lot more often than it was. So what we decided to do in response to that was to say, you know what? Now it's just going to happen every time, because that's what the code requires. There's too much at stake here for us to have somebody who it might be their first time ever looking at a plan like this for this technology. It's just not a smart way to do it. We thought of a smarter one, require that peer review for all projects. And not only did we want to require it, NYSERDA actually built in a peer review program into our incentive. So anyone who's receiving state funds for any project in the state has to go through one or two of NYSERDA's 3 vetted experts. So NYSERDA did a competitive solicitation and selected 3 different companies, all with very deep experience in this very specific technology, especially relating to code compliance for this technology. They're going to be reviewing every piece of permitting documentation and approving it before this is eligible for state money. So we have, I think, some of the most qualified people in the country, if not the world, reviewing these plans before they're even hitting your code enforcement official's desk. That said, this is a redundancy to local code enforcement. This is not, impinging on home rule power. This is something that happens on the side. The code enforcement official or the building inspector is still the legal authority in charge of permitting these projects. So the outcome of our NYSERDA's peer review, there will be a report. The report will be handed over to the developer. The developer will be able to take that report to the authority having jurisdiction, to the permitting official, and say, this is my NYSERDA peer review. It was approved. The authority having jurisdiction has the power to accept that, which we would highly recommend, because we had experts vetting experts to do that at the state level. That said, the legal permitting authority is still in the hands of local jurisdiction. So should you want to require a second peer review, you have the full authority to do that at the local level too. So you can have a redundancy on top of our redundancy just to make absolutely sure that these plans have been vetted by someone who is qualified to vet them. Many people. We've got a few other things here that I want to call out. I think Paul is probably going to talk about this one, so I'll do it quickly. But qualified personnel are available for dispatch within 15 minutes and arrive within 4 hours. That is something that we took from New York City. Thanks, Paul. They had something called a certificate of fitness program, whereby in New York City, the FDNY has to approve someone who is basically responsible for the system. They are a go-between between industry and the fire department. They are triage. They help the FDNY in terms of subject matter expertise, understanding the health of the battery and emergency response should an event happen. Fortunately, we have not had one yet in New York City. So we took this, NFPA 855 actually took this from FDNY first. And then we took it from NFPA 855 and added this 4-hour arrival on scene. So that's the first thing anywhere like it outside of New York City. All of the national standards just say thou shalt dispatch within 15 minutes. And we thought, okay, what a lot of these manufacturers are Korean. What if they're dispatching from Korea within 15 minutes? What does that do for us? Does it really help? So we put this 4-hour timeline whereby you have to leave within 15 minutes, but also you can't be more than 4 hours away. And that is the first of anything like it outside of New York City, which is only 2 hours. It can be challenging to get from point A to point B in New York City in 2 hours too, as I just learned on the way up here. So I think Paul's going to hit that one a little bit harder. Another thing that works in tandem with that one is the number 5 here, a battery management storage. A battery management system must be monitored by a 24/7 staffed remote facility. So we have folks who are looking at all of the information coming out of that battery all of the time. That can be thousands of data points per second. So there is a lot of information to monitor coming out of those. We in New York, again, are the first to require that there be a staffed remote operations facility monitoring that data. And those are the folks that you would call if you arrive on scene. You're going to see, per the signage requirement there, you're going to see a phone number. You would call that number, you'll reach these people who are monitoring the battery in the remote operations center. They're going to tell you critical information about the health of that battery and the condition of the battery at that moment. That's, again, going to work in tandem with number 3 up there, so we have help on the way physically to the site while you have that expert guidance available to you immediately by phone from the remote operations center. I'm going to hop over to the other side here. Another big thing that we learned from the reinspection process is that we should probably have these things be reinspected as a matter of state law. So that's what we did. We thought that issuing one permit and getting one inspection and saying, okay, we're done now, was not wise, especially given kind of the overgrown vegetation and some of the site upkeep issues that we found. And then in addition to that, we noticed that O&M laws were not necessarily kept up to what you would want to see from someone expecting scrutiny in the future. So this is state law now where there will be recurring special inspections. The code says every 3 years there is a process that you can leverage to work with the Department of State to make the fire code more stringent. So if you wanted to do a local tailoring of the fire code, you could up that to 1 year. There's a process through Executive Law Section 379 to work with your Department of State to do that. The code is going to default to 3 years because that's what the folks who are responsible for the code come up with the appropriate cadence. And not to belabor this much longer than I need to, but we're also going to look at number 4, include emergency response plan and annual local first responder training. This is one of the things that wasn't in the 2020 New York State Fire Code because it was in NFPA 855. And we were kind of thinking that folks would design to both, and then through the re-inspections, realizing they weren't necessarily designing both. So we decided we would take the choice away and force them to design both. So now every project must have an emergency response plan that is geared toward first responders. So a lot of times in facilities world, you'll see emergency operations plan and things of that like, but they're geared toward facilities. What should the people who work? So we were very clear about, we want something that the primary audience is first responders. What do those folks need to know when they're arriving on scene in the unlikely event of an incident with this battery? In addition to that, we're not saying, just put a plan together, file it with the local fire chief, and then forget about it and go build jobs in Texas. No, we're saying you also have to be here and offer the local first responders annual trainings, which include a training on that emergency response plan and an on-site training at the battery. So you have to offer to take the local first responders to the battery in the community with the emergency response plan in hand and make sure that the people who would be tasked with responding to that fire understand what to do every single year. So those are just a few things I think that we're most proud of in terms of what we added to the code through the working group. Again, this will be circulated. There's also a memo, or a report rather, fire code recommendations report on the fire safety working group website. Anyone can look at that. We did a really intentional, again, job of showing all the work. So there are code citations where we reference national standards, where we reference New York City's fire code. All of that is there so you can cross-reference if you have the time to do that. Again, if you need help sleeping, looking back and forth between codes and standards is a great way to doze off quickly. And then we also added in there what we did that is going beyond the national code. So what about New York's fire code is stronger than anywhere else in the country? That is all written out in that memo as well. Peer review. So this was really I think the thing that we paid the most attention to, because between those emergency response plans and first responder training, we have what to do in the event of an incident covered. Now we got to figure out what to do to prevent the incident from happening in the first place, which is arguably far more important. So that's where the peer review process comes in. We have 3 contractors, as I mentioned earlier, Camelot Energy Group, who has been doing renewable energy code compliance for 25 years. You do the math on that, that's about how long there have been codes to comply with for renewable energy. They've really been in since the beginning. DNV is the entity that does all of the peer reviews for New York City. We're both at the NY and the Department of Buildings in New York City. They're also a global expert. They specialize in technical diligence for financiers. So they are some serious folks doing serious work. And then ESRG, you'll hear from Paul tonight. They're the folks who, among other things, wrote New York City's code, which again is one of the first lithium-ion specific sets of regulations in the world. So we have these folks that are going to be looking over all of the project documentation for every project over 600 kilowatt hours, which is pretty small. It's about the size of 3 refrigerators. So it's not like these giant shipping container ones. We're actually going much smaller than that. So pretty much anything that you would feel concerned with is going to go through our peer reviewers, those 3 companies, before it even reaches the local code enforcement's desk for code compliance. I'm going to speed up a little bit here. That's the working group bit. I think it's important to talk about how energy storage is permitted in New York, because I have read a lot of legacy press that gets it wrong. So I just wanted to clear that up here. If an energy storage system is paired with a renewable generator, so solar or wind primarily, and that renewable generator is less than 25 megawatts, it is permitted at the local level entirely. The storage is entirely permitted at the local level, through your local requirements, through seeker, through the fire code, through NEC, all the other local requirements. The one and only time that you will see an energy storage system permitted by the Office of Renewable Energy Siting and Transmission is if it is paired with a renewable generator greater than 25 megawatts. So if you have storage paired with a 50 megawatt solar installation, the Office of Renewable Energy Siting is going to say that storage is technically part of that broader project, and they're going to evaluate it in that situation only. If you have a standalone system, which means it charges and discharges from the grid, it's not connected to any renewable generation or fossil generation directly, just connected to the grid, that is always going to be permitted entirely at the local level. I've even seen in the New York Post that this is not the case. The New York Post has that wrong. This is the case, entirely at the local level for all standalone energy storage. When we have standalone energy storage that is greater than 80 megawatts, we still see that permitted at the local level, but with the added approval of the Public Service Commission. So the Public Service Commission, in addition to all of the local approvals and requirements, has to issue another approval if they're going to be over the 80 megawatts. But that is not in competition with local authority. It doesn't really interact with home rule authority at all. It's over and above home rule. So the only time you will see the Office of Renewable Energy Siting have anything to say about an energy storage project is if you've got 25 megawatts or greater of solar or wind on the same site. That is the only time you will see. Very important to understand because a lot of folks. For the last few minutes here, I just want to get into another thing that CNA sometimes you hear, sometimes you see on Facebook, sometimes that the idea that this technology is too new and the regulations haven't had time to catch up and people are just rushing to put them in our backyard. Couldn't be further from the truth. This long list of standards here is not a comprehensive list. It's not an exhaustive list of standards that apply to energy storage systems, but they all do. So we have the Underwriters Laboratories. They are probably the lead in the country in terms of pre-qualifying equipment from a safety perspective. We have multiple UL standards and tests that apply to this technology at the manufacturer level. So before we have anybody trying to sell it to the grid to try to install it in your communities, the manufacturers who design and build the products have to go through all of this testing from UL to be able to clear the first hurdle. We also have the International Fire Code, which is written by the International Code Council. That's what New York State's fire code is based on. That's at the national level. Again, international is a bit of a misnomer. It's primarily American with some Canadian and Mexican uptake, but it's primarily an American standard. And then we have National Fire Protection Agency, probably the thinnest niche of this discipline of keeping us safe from fire and electrical hazards. There's a whole host of standards, all of which apply to every single energy storage system, including, as I mentioned before a few times, NFPA 855, which is the standard for installing energy storage systems. So all of this is regulation before you even get to New York State. This is all national. Before you get to New York State, all of this applies to energy storage in terms of regulation and oversight. Just to go a little bit deeper into that, in 2016, we have the first edition of UL 9540. What that does is certify that all the components of an energy storage system work safely in harmony together, so that the cells that are being used in the module, in the container, with that fire suppression, with that battery management system are all being tested together as one thing to make sure that not one little piece of that is going to trip up the entire system. And then when that is demonstrated to UL's standard, they're going to give you what's called an equipment listing, which is like a certification. It's a stamp of approval from UL saying you have passed our tests, you are 9540 certified. You see, in 2017, we have UL 9540A. That is not pass-fail. That is a thermal runaway propagation test method. So it is a test method that all energy storage systems must undergo at the cell level, the module level, and the unit level. And what that test is for is to see what happens when we induce thermal runaway intentionally. How far does it spread? Can the system contain it? Does the system burn out? Does the fire from the thermal runaway spread to other units in the system? Does it spread outside of the project fence line? So that is what the UL 9540A test is designed to show you. And that is not a stamp of approval. That is not a pass or fail test. It is essentially a packet of data, a report. It's going to say, here's what we found when we induced thermal runaway in this, and here's what to do, basically. Here's what you need to do to make sure that this is a safe system and that we don't see this thermal runaway spread to adjacent components of the system. 2018, we have an energy storage system in International Fire Code through the International Code Council. This doesn't have a lot of lithium-ion specific regulations yet. This is primarily a lead acid standard. And in 2018 and 2019, you see FDNY come out with their Rule 608-001. That is really one of the first lithium-ion specific regulations in the country, born right here in New York. Paul was actually integral in creating that. I hope he tells you about it next. In case he doesn't, I think it's important that you all know that before you hear the man speak. And then in 2019, we see a new NFPA 855, which is for lithium-ion. we see a fourth edition of that burn test, the thermal runaway test, 9540A. We see an updated International Code Council that focuses on lithium-ion batteries instead of considering them an afterthought and focusing on lead acid. So we see this at the turn of the last decade. We see this very concerted effort from the national bodies. And then in 2023 and 2024, as I mentioned earlier, we have those national standards being updated. Here's how that translates to New York. As I said, in May of 2020, New York adopts the draft 2021 NFPA 855. New York is the first state to do that in the country. Again, California is second. They do it in July of 2021. So we are over a year ahead of them in that regard. And then in July of 2025, we did our first fire code update. Since the initial lithium-ion regulations were adopted, that just happened this year. As I've said before, they will go into full effect on January 1st. But they are functionally in effect right now, and developers can opt into complying with those regulations should they choose to, and they are being advised to do that. A little commercial from my team at NYSERDA, again, it's the Clean Energy Siting team. We have a guidebook for local governments. We are actively adding to this right now with more guidance coming along from Paul's team and from a few other contractors that we've been able to bring on now that we're in a better spot with the fire safety working group, and there's a lot less to do there. We're focusing on building out this resource to be able to give more guidance to communities across the state. We also have interagency fire safety working group resources. These are all linked. When you get a copy of this, you can go through them. OFPC resources. OFPC is the State Office of Fire Prevention and Control. They created a service response guide and a lithium-ion awareness course that's available through the state learning management system to any firefighters in the state who are able to access that. And then finally, as I just said, we have some clean energy siting resources. You can find them on NYSERDA's Clean Energy Siting page. In addition to that, we have some site tours. Some folks in this room have already come down to the Bronx. Site tours in New York City happening all through the end of the year. There will be a link in this slide deck. The next one is happening on the 24th of November. If folks want to come down, I honestly wouldn't recommend that because it's a Monday before Thanksgiving. We're trying to direct folks to December 10th. That is when we will be doing one, I believe, the Bronx, but I would have to double check that. And we're encouraging folks who are not in emergency services to go to that one. Who are involved in emergency services directly. We have one the last week of November and the first week of December and the 10th. So there are still a few opportunities if folks want to make a trip down to the city to see, how FDNY does these things. Paul and I have been walking with folks through that. It's been a lot of fun. We've gotten good feedback on it. You can reach my entire team at cleanenergyhelp@nyserda.ny.gov anytime you'd like. If you are representing local government, I would ask that you make that clear in the email because we do get a lot of email to that, and it's not necessarily for a lot of email, as email addresses tend to work. So what we use that for is to interact with local government. So it really helps us to prioritize your requests if you let us know clearly in the body or the subject of that email that you are a representative of a local government. So we want to prioritize that. And I'm going to turn it over to Paul.
Bill, thank you. Paul, give me a second. I'm just going to get yours out.
It's hard to follow up YouTube. Yeah, great, man. So yeah, we're those that, my name is Paul Rogers. I'm retired from the University of California. We looked at that in the we're talking a lot about codes and regulations and stuff like that. And some people may not be fully aware of it. Fire code and regulations that are associated with it, the fire safety, and this is some of the reasons why we have it here. Reviewing people that are doing some of the manual inspections that are coming in. We wanted to make sure that this thing is, we put out a good regulatory infrastructure for fire code. It's good. I can pretty much say it's probably the best in the country. And it's achievable. What I mean by that is that there are some places that are trying to put things in there that are not achievable. So they're going to tell you they're going to do it. Guess what? Probably not going to do it. So everything that we put in the code is very much achievable for any manufacturer or any developer coming into now. But again, we must make sure that it's enforced properly. And this is why the help is there. Because it is a very, very technical code. For those who, again, who are not familiar with codes, it's basically a list of requirements that they have to abide by in order to get approved. And there's a lot of technical stuff in it. But we deal with fire codes every single day. In this room itself, right, there's a lot of fire codes just in the room. You have to own the house, you have a fire code. The walls that you have, a little fire code. And the list goes on and on and on. And then we also deal with product standards that you are to part of the performance standards. And we talk a little bit about that too, but we deal with it on a regular basis too. The refrigerator in the house, that's a part of the performance standard. So, right, that's as it's considered in the package. Everyone knows that how you feel about your house. And then we'll shoot it, yeah, bring out a refrigerator and anything. Who's got one of those old refrigerators, right? That have the sulfur dioxide. But anyway, during my time with the New York City Fire Department, it was back in 2013 when we first started looking. The question that we had, that we were concerned a little bit because we didn't know much about the batteries. And we asked the first question, what happens when they go on fire? Do you think the answer? Never happened. But if you also remember that we had holocaust. Well, I guess the other person used to anyway, that's okay, right? We still have to move forward. There was a great chief in our fire pension. And we were told that we were closing down the nuclear power plant with the activity being about 25 to 30% of the he said, we need to go up our feet and figure this out. So we did a lot of R&D. We dealt with the military, we dealt with, in particular, the Navy, where they were using lithium-ion batteries in submarines. Any Navy people here? No? Well, we have a submarine that was underneath water, and one of the seal over any type of ship is a fire on the ship, right? But now this is on the water. So we really wanted to take a look at that, and we had a lot of questions, and we got a lot of stakeholders as a result of that. What I'm getting at here is, it was 5 years, almost 5 years of R&D took place on a putting pen to paper. Once we were able to figure out what how they failed, and the hazards associated with failures, we started to implement different things to actually try to manage it. See, in New York City, right, we have a very urban environment. We look out for responders. That's number one. I think responders can do their job, and we can keep the rest of the community safe. But we don't only look at it from trying to prevent it. We do everything in place to try to make sure it never happens. We look at it as, okay, if it does go on fire, worst case scenario, it does go on fire, is it manageable? And that's how we looked at it. Is it manageable for the fire service? We came away saying, hey, we can manage this. We definitely can manage these things. And even if it's a volunteer, I fully believe that they can manage and that it totally fail. The goal is to make sure it never fails, right? And right now, New York City's had these things installed since 2018. One incident, one fire. One fire that has taken place in New York City. And this was why we said, hey, we're doing well in New York, let's grab some of that stuff and let's throw it into the state to make sure that we can try to use that. But again, it has to deal with enforcement, making sure that the right people are looking at these things. Just the architecture, some people are not even familiar what they look like. There's someone that asked me when we were sitting there getting some food, what they even look like. But this is basically how they look, right? You start off with these cells like this. That a group of cells make a module, and then you got racks, and then those racks go inside of a container like that. And all of those containers are stacked up, usually separated, a separation distance between them. Each one of these components has a performance test inside of it. So this is each one of them have their consistent performance test by UL standards. So again, that's a layer of safety right there. It's just looking at it from that point of view. And then these things are all driven by what they call the battery management system. And that's the BMS. Battery management system is the ICD components. Listening to the basic action. It's looking at a lot of data. But what we looked at in the New York City Fire Department when we first heard about the battery management system, I perked up when they mentioned it. I said, well, tell me more about it. And They said, well, it's collecting data and everything like that, and we wanted to know, well, we only need certain type of data, right? We need to know the heat, voltage, and charge, that's what we really care about. Well, that's nothing for everything to the state code, and that's available for the fire service, you asked about. And this is where the training will come in for the fire service, why do you need that? Well, we need to know whether something is on fire or not, when you have that whole system buttoned up and you see nothing, and you show up at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's nothing showing, this is why there's going to be all for you to say, hey, can you see anything on the battery management system on the end? And that just happened recently with us in New York City, where we had an incident, right, where the fire alarm went off, fire alarm showed up. We checked our battery management system because we're certificate fitness and we're certificate fitness, we're subject matter expert. We checked it, well, if we don't see anything here, I'm like, all right, well, if they're screaming, let us know. We would talk to the dispatcher. I'm like, no, nothing. And sure enough, it was just a false alarm, and we were able to turn the units around within 5 minutes. Within 5 minutes, right? Because if you don't have that reach back help in the fire service, for those people that are in the fire service, you're standing there scratching your head and like, what do I do next? What do I do? I leave this thing? Is it going to go on fire? Well, I can't go into it. This electrical components. I don't want to go into that thing. It shouldn't go into that thing. And this is why that help is now going to be available for people in the fire service. Again, just another look at it. This is just manufacturing. Most of them are going to be looking like this. They're coming to your areas. Some may be a little bit smaller. Some may be a little bit larger. But this is what they'll look like. And there is a lot of regulatory infrastructure that goes into these products themselves. And we'll talk a little bit about that moving forward. But these cabinet style is something that has a natural fire break to them. And this is what we look at. Let's say they do go on fire. Right? I'm talking really. Let's say there is an event that takes place. What we looked at in the code was if it does take place, it stays within the container, and that's the goal. Well, the failure doesn't leave the container. It stays right within the container, and we don't have. And we've seen incidents where they actually have small little events. It's a rare occasion that it happened, but sometimes when they fail and it does exactly what it's supposed to do, that's called a successful failure. We've seen that. That's exactly what we're supposed to do. It did exactly what it was designed to do. You fail and you get fired. It's a good thing. And some people are like, no, it shouldn't go on fire. I agree with you, it shouldn't go on fire. But there's always going to be a chance. No one can ever eliminate it. But we've significantly reduced the risk of it ever happening with all the layers of safety that need to be compromised from a fire event taking place. So Bill kind of went into this really well, but the 2021 code, right, for the state of New York, well, actually, we adopted that a year early. So this thing was canned and ready to go. Like, for instance, the 2026 NFPA version, this is 2023. The 2026 was ready in mid-2024. So you can't, now you have to hold it into 2026. So the 2021 code was ready back in 2019. We adopted it early in 2020. We had to get permission to do that. And that was the most advanced code that we had at the particular time. And in there, it did allow for the peer review, and it also allowed for that subject matter expert, but it was optional if people asked for it. That's what happened when we found out. No one was asking for it. Because they didn't understand the code. Now we made it mandatory. Now it's a must. And you must have it, and you must do this. So that was a big win for us on our side. To make sure that that is all taken care of. Bill went into this here, and I have a little bit of redundancy because I'm trying to get deeper into it. But this 9540, when we were first looking at this within the New York City, they were using standard code UL 1973. And we said, well, if the batteries are charging and the inverter, right, going from AC to DC doesn't match up with the batteries, could we have a problem? He said, yeah, you can. Well, that's not a good idea. So that's how 9540 came up. So they said any battery that is charging has to match up with the inverter that is actually. It's similar to what you have with your phone. Has anyone gone out to the gas station and got the cheap cord? Come on, go ahead. Yeah, well, that cord, right, is really not made for that particular phone, although it's charging it, it's really not made. Sometimes it will get too hot, and that starts to degrade the battery as a result of that. So 9540 prevents any of that from happening, right? We have to make sure that everything is balanced up, right? They're all playing nice and sandbox. And that was a big thing moving forward. But these were the subcodes that were in there, or the substandards. Again, this is a performance test. And there's a lot of work that goes into performance tests. It's done by a national recognized testing laboratory. That means that someone with credentials is looking at it, and they're not signing off on it until they feel satisfied that it meets the performance of the 9540. So if you come into New York State, don't come in unless you have a 9540. So here's a practical situation. I get a call from a guy. He says to me before, what is a field certification? I'm going to tell you some story. Again, why we put these things in place in the upcoming code. I said, field certification. He doesn't have a listing, but he said he's going to have a field certification. I got to figure that out. Meanwhile, I sit on this committee. I'm like, they didn't even tell me that we were having these field certifications. What does that look like? So now I start calling some people. I call some people who do well. And anyway, make a long story short, well, there's no such thing as a field certification. So they were being told something that they wanted to read. So again, that waters down the performance you are listed. So now we tell them if it is not listed, you cannot put it in New York City, period. Or not New York City, New York State, city and state. So little things like that is where the peer review people will pick up stuff like that immediately. If you don't give it as attestation saying that this thing is listed to 9540, now you have to get a new container, a new battery. This one cannot be used in the state that is not listed. That reduces the risk of an event taking place. Just having that listing alone reduces the risk of an event. The next thing is, and again, Bill mentioned it, and I'll get a little bit, I sit on this committee too. 9548, this was a game changer for us in New York City, and went into 855, and then it also went into the state. UL 9540 is a destructive testing, it's what they call large scale fire testing. When you're not exactly sure what the results are going to be for something, and you have to actually burn the full system, it's a big thing in the fire protection world. So what they need to do is you saw that, go back, this thing here, they actually have to fail this full system, and they want to see what takes place as a result of the failure. So they're looking at it that this thing is going on. That's $1 million test right there. When we first asked for that in New York City, people were walking away from us. We're not doing it. Guess what? They came back. You know why? Because the whole 855 and the United States started saying, yeah, we want that too. And then guess what? The state, yeah, we want that too. So everyone was on board. So guess what? We forced the industry to actually start to destroy their systems. Normally what they'll do is they'll take the cell, they'll get some data from the cell and extrapolate the data, make it like a big container. We're like, no, you're not. You actually put these things and destroy it. You're going to put them on fire. And that's what they did. So going back to this 9540 testing here, that was a big thing, validation of safety. Even if it were to actually fail, the failure stage was in the container itself. So if you have 100 containers on site, one is affected, everything else should be totally fine. Everything should be shut down. The thing will be shut down. So if the fire department comes in, they will have the proper equipment, the proper training, to make sure that no one gets hurt. And this comes back to getting deeper into, I know there's one piece here, how the other fires that I see the fire department multi-courses on. But making sure that you're getting the right information for your people, make sure that they are trained properly. Bill mentioned something about annual training. Annual training was put in place because we went out and we spoke to the fire. We were like, what do you need? What do you need on your end? And one of the things that they said was the annual training because they have a turnover rate. Is that right? There is a turnover rate, and we want to make sure that we capture those people that are coming in on that end. So the annual, but if you don't make contact with the people, you know, they may send an email to you, right, saying, hey, you know, it's time for annual training, and say, yeah, we'll put it off, and then you don't get back to them. Who's that? Again, this goes back to making sure that you utilize what we gave you. We gave this to you. We gave this to you to actually use. These are the recommendations that are out there. Constant monitoring the battery management system. Here's the spirit of what we were trying to do in New York City. Again, I'll refer to New York City because a lot of stuff that we put into the state came out of New York City. We check the battery management system every single day as a third party. They are being monitored in a remote location. I'm going to tell you exactly how it is. They're being monitored in a remote location. And no one is sitting there watching one particular one. I'm telling you that right now. What happens is, if there is a problem, one will flash on the screen. Tesla has these things all over the world. They know where every single one of their containers are. Every single one. You know how I know that? Because when we go and do inspections, I'll say, okay, we're on Highland Boulevard in Staten Island. Yeah, we know that one. Yeah. 94 Middlefield. Yep, we have it. And they can tell you, they know exactly where it is. They'll pull it up on their screen, and they can remotely shut it down. Because the code says that they gotta be able to remotely shut it down. You know what they do during the inspection phase? Show me. Don't tell me. Show me that you can do it. We have to actually show the inspectors how it can be remotely shut down by them in Texas, where they're monitoring. So a lot of that stuff was important for us moving forward for the annual inspections or the every 3-year inspections, making sure that we can validate all the stuff that they're telling you could happen, does happen. The 15-minute response, I kind of just gave you a scenario of that, where you need to have a retrack. My time in the fire service did 25 years and it has this material. If I went into the building, the first person, I don't know, high-rise building, the first person I would say is the building engineer. All right, what floors do the elevators go? Where's your elevator pads? Where's the sky lobbies? All this, I don't know that. The same applies here. Or if I went to a tank depot, tell me the people who are working on these things. I don't know this one. The same applies with this moving forward, is that we've got some help for you. And we knew we needed that when we were building out the code. NFPA 855 puts it as an optional. If you don't ask for it, you don't get it. The state said it's no longer optional. It is now mandatory that they have a subject matter. Let me go a step further. When we're doing this, we have what they call a certificate fitness code. And basically, they become the managers to the fire service and the developers. We're constantly making sure that this thing is performing right and making sure that they're compliant to the code. Sitting there and this person says, yeah, I'm gonna be certificate fitness. This is our first system we're going. And we're like, okay, you're certificate fitness. And the head engineer says, don't get sick. You know where I'm going with this? Get sick, people. Right? Is that practical? So we require 4 people. I'm not telling you need to require 4 people. I'm just saying that you probably should have 1 of them. You probably have at least 2 people so there's redundancy. Because someone's going to go on vacation. Someone's going to get sick. And at least try to think about that logically, right? At least have more than 1 person who may be available for that. They are also there when they get to the scene to help the fire service, right? To give them advice, but also to take over the scene after the conditions or it's under control. Now you have stranded energy in the down system. My fire service people in here, what's the next thing? Who's taking charge of this because we want to get out of here, right? Mm-hmm. So it works. We want to get out of here. We looked at that. We said, yeah, we agree with you. You shouldn't be sitting on this thing, unless you don't know. And Bill said, oh, they're coming from Korea. We said, no, they're not coming from Korea. They're coming from 4 hours away. That sounds like a long time. Sounds like a long time for the 4 hours, but it's the only place in the country that has it. You tell you that one of the states, and you probably don't know, on the West Coast, they have 24 hours. You go 4 hours. They'll have pushback by it. They'll have pushback by it. 4 hours. So they need to be there, and they're there. They're not there to put the fire out. They're not there to do that. They can give you advice on what to do next if you have a question. For instance, if you're putting up a tower ladder and you think you're gonna put 1,200 gallons of water on the top of the actual battery energy storage system, what do you think you're gonna do? You're probably gonna puncture it, and you're probably gonna put that one that's not on fire, on fire. Does that make sense? Water and electricity don't mix. We do that. Can you use water on the one that's fire? Yeah, you can. Can you use water on the exposures? Yes, you can, as long as it's used correctly. Making sure it's raining down. Those systems are made for rain, not for 1,200 gallons of water that are out in the top of it. Another thing is closed circuit TV. That's another thing that they need to be required to do. Make sure that they have them on there so someone can take a look at it. We've used these on a couple of occasions where we wanted to look at the balance of the system, because maybe there's no problem with the battery, but what about the transformer? So closed circuit TV should give you a whole look at that. You may not need it on your side unless it's very big with fire service, but if you need access to that, maybe we can try to make that happen. Or maybe you should ask the developer, hey, is there any way that we can actually have access to it? And they should be able to do that. Fire alarm in Central Station. So in Warwick, New York, I actually responded to that incident. In Warwick, New York, fire department's doing their weekly drill, and someone knocks on the door and they said, hey, we think we see smoke coming out of one of the containers. That's how they were notified. That was the event going on. But at that particular time, it was actually installed according to the code. It wasn't required to have a fire alarm. Now, they are required to have a fire alarm. For those who don't know, a fire alarm has a device that will pick up whether it's a smoke detector, an IR camera, a heat detector, whatever it may be, send a signal to the fire alarm control panel goes to a monitoring station dispatches the fire department. And in this case, we want the monitoring station to also notify subject matter experts. That's exactly what we're doing in the city. As the fire department is running to the scene, we're already on the phone with the dispatcher, identifying ourselves, saying, we must be in the other battery management system. That's in a perfect world. So they knew before they even got there that there was nothing going on as far as what we saw on. Does this all make sense to the people that are listening, especially from the fire service, who actually have to, when they have to go? So those fire alarms are now have to be inspected yearly, right? We have to make sure that they work. We have to validate that inspection. That inspection goes back to the fire service on a yearly basis. Whoever, any code officials here? No? Anyone who make their report? I have the tremendous amount of respect for the code officials. They have a lot on their plate, so I truly have a tremendous amount of respect. The annual training, we kind of went into. The peer review is really important. Make sure that these things are looked at properly. There's some subtle differences. Right? We want to make sure that the right people are looking at it. As Bill mentioned before, that are coming in and looking at it. Even when they're going into their initial operating permit, someone should be taking the approved plans, going to the site and saying, you said you have 7 containers, there's 80. It's not on the approved plan. That's not an approved system. Review your plans, making sure that these things are reflecting what's there. Does that make sense to everyone? We want to make sure that any plans that are approved based on when we get there. Sometimes there's going to be difference in plans. They're called as-built plans. When they do as-built plans, which means that, yeah, we planned on doing it this way, but we had to make changes as we go to that. And they don't notify you that they made the changes. That's important that they notify you, right? Because that's not an approved plan. You have to get that thing approved. So, again, going back to making sure that everything is done properly. Inspection during the life of the system itself. If they have an emergency stop, does that emergency stop work? Especially when the fire department shows up. Can we do it? Can we hit it? Is it a button type stop? Is it a knife that we pull down? Does it actually shut everything off? That needs to be exercised and validated. If they tell you they have it, and they tell you it's going to do something, prove it to me when you get to the scene, right? And I'm giving you, again, some food for thought when you're thinking about moving forward with these things. Site-specific dedicated, so what we were saying is that there were boilerplate emergency response plans that were coming with them and say, yeah, here you go, here's your system, and then just do this. And we said, no, that's not good enough. We want it site-specific. So not only is it going to be everything that's going to be around it, you need a joint area, you'd like to see what's in there. If there's something that's close to a receptor or something, hey, about 600 feet from a house or whatever it may be, maybe we should just make sure that, hey, if something happens here, we want to calm down the people. And as Bill mentioned before, the events that have taken place, there's been a lot of data collected from these things. And there's also been a study out there that we have seen the smoke, the products of combustion from a battery energy storage system are aligned with the products of combustion of a structural house fire. So I go to people who tell me, well, how far do we need to evacuate? I don't know, how far do you evacuate during a structural fire? We don't evacuate during a structural fire. I've got sheltered people. Does anyone here in the fire service here actually ever done an evacuation for a structural fire? Yeah. And not many people that I know have done that either. The only time maybe is because maybe it's an attached building where you're concerned about, the building next door going on fire, right? That's probably something to think about. We don't do structural. I can tell you my experience, and probably your experience too. Usually have people on the street watching like, oh, look at this, Everyone's kind of looking around at this thing, right? That's the same smoke, constituents of smoke that we're going to deal with the battery. I'm not telling you it's good that we want them to breathe it in, but this is reality. And I'm all about reality. And then eventually the smoke will shift, and then the people will say, all right, let me walk up this way. Now that happens, but no one, we're not putting people into the hospital. But that's just my experience. Maybe other people have other experiences, but I'm trying to be real to you. Right? We also want the fire service to be involved with that emergency response plan. If they're saying, well, you guys are going to do X, Y, and Z, we can't do that. So they need to make sure, for whoever my approving people are here in the room, that they speak with the fire service. They at least go there. And that gives a tremendous amount of power to the fire service, but don't abuse the power. Don't abuse that power. Right? You use about that much power, don't abuse it. We're starting to see some people like this. That's not fair. I'm all about being fair. And getting this and educating people that they need to go visit the fire service is a big step forward. You now have a voice. And what we mean by that is that if you're going to say, we're going to need, a new tower ladder for this and that may be a little challenge. You could run the project. And as Jeff actually mentioned, you can see the importance of putting these things in there. We saw the need big time. We saw it in New York City. So all of this plays into it because what happens when the lights go out for the fire service? You run like crazy. You run like stuck elevators and medical emergencies, and the list goes on and on. If they don't have backup generators in the house, you're running like crazy as a result of that. And now you just reduce the fire protection as a result of all the different stuff that you go in there, part of the blackout itself. So, but if there is something that is a piece of equipment, for instance, hey, what really have a thermal imaging camera that works so little things like that is that's fair game. If you don't have it. Or hey, we want to get a gas meter. That's fair game. I think that's fair game. And very reasonable. It's a very reasonable request to ask for something like that on your end. One guy said, well, what happens when our guys go in there and all the smoke gets onto their bunkers? He said, well, that's a good question. What are you doing with your structural fire? That's what we there was a study put out by Gates where they actually burnt batteries and they put this structural gear right up against it, which you probably wouldn't get close to where they did. And just by using water alone, they got over 95%. Just by using water alone, they got about 95%. So Decom's always a good thing, right? We have to make sure we scrub that stuff out to make sure that we reduce the problems with firefighters as they put these things on a regular basis. The peer review, as we kind of really mentioned, and we went over a couple of this already, compliant before the construction, and that subject matter expert should be there the moment the batteries are on the scene. Not when the thing is up and running. The moment the battery's on it, you should have a sign with a number. Can the battery still go on fire when they get there, even though they're not hooked up yet? The answer is yes. So we gotta have that subject matter expert with a big sign with a number. Call the number, make sure someone picks up on the other side. Right? They could have the wrong number up there and say, Joe's Pizzeria, and like, no, that's the wrong number. You know, and then guess what? It happened. They misprinted the number on the signage. They weren't trying to fool it. It's just the guy that made the signage, they misprinted it. And when Becky and I called, they're like, is this a joke? We had to patch it up. Like, oh, we should check it ourselves. But this is why you need to do your due diligence, especially your fire service people. If you're dependent on that number on game day, you better make sure it works. When these things eventually, once in a while, you'll see these things change hands to different people. Is that number still going to apply? Or is there going to be a new number? We're seeing this going on right now, right? Where there's going to be a new number. So that signage has to change. As a result of it. And I'm hoping I'm giving, again, everyone food for thought for things that I'm witnessing now and what I'm seeing and how we're going through all of this stuff. And for those, there's no people, but for those who are the special use permits, right? Does that mean that they need to get a new special use permit? Because it wasn't in the name of X, and now it's going to be sold for Y. I don't know if we're going to go that deep, it may not change it, but do they have to now change that to Y? On the operating permit, they do. For the fire operating permit, they need to change the name on that. We don't want to stall them, but we just want to cover our bases on that. Again, moving forward. So the peer review will look at a list of things here, making sure that everything is compliant, making sure that they have fire alarms, the matrix. So if they say when the smoke detector goes off, it's going to activate this, it's going to send a signal to the fire department, it's going to signal to the subject matter expert. Okay, let's set that thing off and see if it does. Make sense? Or if the central monitoring station is going to call the people, and this is what we do again, what's the number to the subject matter expert? You'll have the central monitoring station on the phone. What's the number to the central monitoring station that you call? I mean, to the subject matter expert that you can call. And then they'll say, okay, call it. And then you're on our phone. We actually transfer to our cell phone just to make sure. But anyway, going back to it, the validation is important, but you can see how it can get really tied up if you don't follow the rules properly. And when it comes to game day, you say, why isn't this working? Because no one actually went out and looked at this and deeply. Again, going back to what Bill said, making sure that we have everyone on the same page and educating you on what you should be doing. But we can't force you to do it. That makes sense, I hope. Safety validation, making sure that after construction there, the approved plans and all that functionality stuff works, that the BMS actually is recording things, that is available for the subject matter expert from the fire side, for the incident commander if they need it, how the incident commander is going to interpret that information, which we will get into when we get into fire training, which we're not doing tonight. Any repairs and replacements that need to be done need to be documented. Are they using the right equipment? And we see this happening in New York City with consumer products right now, is that they're ordering a new cell on Amazon. They're getting the cell and they're doing their own circuitry work in their hoverboards or whatever it may be, with scooters. Mm-hmm. What are we seeing happening in New York City a lot of that? We're seeing the consumer product on our fire. People are doing their own work. You cannot equate these to them. These things are assets. They cost a tremendous amount of money for people to have them. And in fairness to the developers, they're in business to make money. They don't want this to go down. They want this thing to run consistently so they make money. So they have a stake in it too. They want to make sure that this thing doesn't fail. So, most of them, I would say pretty much all of them are very, are very fair. They want to make sure that this thing continues to work. They're not trying to pull the wool over. If there is something out there, it's maybe they don't know, because it's a new industry for some of them too. Yeah, and it goes back to the peer review. We're gonna make sure that if you're doing it right, we're gonna make sure you do it right. So all of that stuff. And again, this all needs to be going back on an annual basis with the operating permit to show that, hey, there's some work that has been done, and we're gonna validate that all that work was done properly. The fire alarm testing and all the other things, that the signage is still there. For those in the fire service that see that, that signage, that's there for you. Not for the general public, for you. It's emergency signage. Do you think any of them could ever go missing?
Never.
Can they actually fade in the sunlight?
Mm-hmm.
Have they ever been defaced with spray paint? Never, right. Again, this is why we tell you that. And if you're doing a drill one day and you're like, hey, this signage is not defaced, there's a number for you to call. There's an emergency number for you to call it, and say, hey, replace the sign.
Can't read it, so can't.
Yeah, can't read it. You're not compliant in the code. I'm sorry I'm going heavy into the fire response people, but I'm looking at it from that point of view, from the fire response. But I think everyone is following along on what they would need to do from their end. That was just a lot of information. I'll end it like this. The regulatory infrastructure that we have in place for these things is in really, really good shape as long as it is enforced properly. As long as it's enforced properly and we have backdrops in place to make sure that we have people that are looking at it that's enforced properly. And we need to do this for the life of the system and with the standard of care of the system itself. Like anything, if you beat it up, eventually it's going to fail. They have a lot of predictive analytics right now that is incorporated into the DMS that can predict things way before anything happens. They can do a repair and replacement. So again, a lot of information. You had Jeff, who gave you a great presentation. I wish I would have recorded it and told people.
We recorded it.
What? You recorded it?
2017.
Well, I was like, wow, this is good. Anyway, so
Do you mind if you and Bill and Jeffrey get up front and people can ask questions for a few minutes?
yeah, why don't we bring everyone up front and we'll start with some questions, because, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you guys, thank you. A quick couple of things, if you have a question, it's not necessarily a debate, and please try to ask one question and let everybody answer, so everybody can ask questions. Let's not try to monopolize the time, okay? So thanks, guys. You guys pick who you want to answer. I'll let you, as people raise their hands.
This question might be for Bill. I'm wondering if municipalities can own battery energy storage systems in order to sell energy back into the grid.
Sure. Yeah, it's good. I mean, the mechanics of that would be just like municipal solar procurement. There's actually very little difference other than if you want standalone with solar, you just stick it there and it does what it does, and you don't need to worry about operation cost. But with storage, you have to charge and discharge, so the revenue is a little bit harder to try to get that to make money. But it's still just like you would with solar, you would work with a storage developer to find out how that works and figure out how you want to configure it.
Brookhaven, Long Island, call them up. They have one. They own it.
What was the name of that?
Brookhaven, Long Island is a municipality that has a battery energy storage system.
If I could just add that I think the county is planning to do that at the emergency communication center, to have that, at least some battery storage. I don't think it's been defined how much yet.
It's true.
And then in addition to, I try to divorce batteries from solar for the most part, because I think the first 5 or so years of this conversation, people were conflating them too much, and they're completely different things. But with an application for storage like that, it is better than solar because it's more versatile. So if you had, your emergency communication center that was outfitted with energy storage, you could also theoretically turn that into a community resilience hub and things of that nature, whereby you have folks can come by, charge their phone, whatever they need to do if the power goes out, when the power goes out, I guess, based on where we are. So it's very versatile, and solar can't do any of that.
They're gonna do both.
Oh, great. And that's even better. So then you have a fully islanded system and you don't need the power to come back on. You can just charge directly.
I'm gonna add to that, that any critical infrastructure that you have in your town already has a battery energy storage system. It may be lead acid based, but any hospital that you have has backup batteries inside of it. Communication center, as you mentioned, Verizon has them out, the buildings that are full of lead acid batteries inside of it. The code addresses that. We talk specifically about lithium ion. There's other chemistries that are out there already. They're called legacy chemistries. I don't know if you know this, but even in World War II, the submarines had lead acid batteries in them to bring them up if they lost. That's how they actually ran. When they came back up, they actually recharged the batteries when they got to the surface, and they turned on the diesel generator to actually recharge the batteries. That's how it worked.
Right now, what is the largest BESS plant that's located in a residential area?
In the world and in
New York State.
New York State? Not sure. I think 20.
Well, what distance from a residential?
In a residential area. An area has been zoned for a residential area. What I'm saying basically is a research that I've done so far, that the largest plant right now is 25 megawatts in Wyoming County, New York. That's the largest. But that's not in a residential area. That's an industrial area going through it. The ones in New York City are only 9 megawatts.
There's some that are 20.
The key capture one out.
20.
The key capture one out by Buffalo is right next to a house, and it's like 25.
That's about right, yeah. Yeah, good question. I wouldn't even want to make it up. I don't know the
Yeah,
answer.
so this, again, the site that we're looking at is a house 330 feet away and one's 400 feet away. And I was always wondering, what classifies residential area? I mean, you read those in the websites. Is that a Brooklyn residential area, or, I mean, it's, the interpretation is where I'm.
I hear you, but I'm saying residential area where people live more. That is a clump of people living in it.
If this can give you any type of security, there has never been a battery energy storage system fire that has left the perimeter of the fence. Never. Never. So it never went outside the perimeter of the fence. Even West Landing, which was the biggest fire in the world.
And then just one more point on the residential. We hear that a lot, no energy storage in residential zones, and it's something that sounds quite reasonable. If you look at zoning maps, if you spend time with them, what you notice about a lot of commercial, manufacturing, industrial districts is that they border residential zones. So we actually have gotten quite a few complaints about proposed projects that are in zoned industrial. And they're saying, well, this is, 500 feet from my house. It's a residential district, and it's an industrial district. The industrial district just has neighboring districts, and that's how our society works.
Even a site we visited down in Bronx a few weeks ago, to me, that was like, a school is right there.
Directly across the
I
street.
mean, right across the street, there's businesses, a Dunkin' Donuts is right, I mean, to me, that was as dense, I was surprised how that was sitting in the middle of all that,
So those people went
But that
over.
was just but my observation.
Yeah, they went over and spoke to the people in the school.
Yeah.
To say, look, if we do have an incident, the fire department's going to direct you, whether you have to have a second mayor, if you have people that may be meeting up with your children. But just think of this, think of a car fire being there.
Yeah.
That was also an overlay district. So New York City Department of City Planning created a zoning district that floats over the existing zone for renewable energy development. So they were actively saying, we want you to put renewable development. We want you to put energy infrastructure right here.
My comment was here to the Bronx. I mean, I'm learning too, right? So, and I have no complaints. I just an observation,
Good.
Does NYSERDA give siting direction, like how far should the containers be from one another? Or anyone out there give, like if you're looking to draft local laws and change your zoning, do you give guidance for things like that?
Yes, the guidance that we have for that is that's not a zoning issue. That's dealt with the fire code and the large scale fire testing that's done, that's required by the fire code. In fact, that you would not technically be allowed to do that through zoning in New York State, because as I mentioned before, there's something called Executive Law Section 379, which is basically Department of State saying you can't amend the fire code through local law. So, enforcement on that is everything. If you do that anyway, no one is going to say, hey, someone has to take you to court over it. But if they do decide to take you to court over it, you're very vulnerable there. So that is kind of a gray area. But our advice on the state is, in accordance with what Department of State wants to see. And that is anything that's in the fire code needs to be in the fire code. And you can amend the fire code through that more restrictive local standard Executive Law 379 process. And we are not technically allowed to deal with that in zoning and land use regulations at all.
What would it be like, just for point of reference, is it 6 feet? What does the fire code lay out?
It's the 3 feet. 3 feet is the minimum, but if the testing results come back where you need 6 feet,
Okay.
they will tell you. That's where the peer review comes in. They take a look at the heat release rates and
Got it.
heat flux and stuff like that. But on the converse side, they could say, well, we tested it to 6 inches. We've seen that. And you know what? And we had no issues with it. And they fully destroyed it. And the one that was right up 6 inches next to it did not go on fire. That's validation that that separation distance has been validated as a result of their large scale fire testing.
And when I say that, like UL 9540A is a test that's not pass fail, you just get this data for interpretation. That's exactly the type of data that I'm talking about. You'll see like this was tested, fully involved, 6 inches away, no propagation. And that's why we have folks like Paul and other literal scientists reviewing this paperwork, because it's a lot. I've spent 10, 11 years in this now. I'm just starting to be able to figure out what those 9540A reports actually mean. So that's why we have people. That's why I decided to bring people in who are better than me at it, because that felt important.
Jen, did you want to say something? I thought was your hand up.
Well, no, I think the question Supervisor Bond was trying to get at maybe like scale and whether scale makes a difference from a safety perspective. So because the 20 megawatt projects and there's 250 megawatt projects. So if you could just talk about whether scale makes a difference from a safety perspective.
Yes. So the whole concept of the container being the unit is considered your fire area. So whether you have 100 or 10 of them, it should not leave the one container. That's it. It should stay within the one container. So that is Fire Protection 101, where you have compartmentation. Just like when we have a fire in a building, you close the door, you confine it to the one particular room, so we have the other rooms that are not. We have the other rooms that are not affected as a result of that. So that concept was brought over into the containerized systems themselves.
Can I just follow up on that? I think a question, we talk about the need to be able to have industrial scale battery storage needing to connect to, really high quality kind of grid connections, these transfer points. What you have in New York City and other places, when we talk about distributing batteries kind of across the Hudson Valley, I'm assuming we also then need to have smaller units also kind of closer to our homes, in our neighborhoods, at our community centers, at our fire stations. What can our grid handle now? Like, could we put a 10 megawatt outside this building in this rural part of Ulster County? Or is the grid too constrained currently to be able to actually do that? Or can we only look for these brand new, power stations currently to be able to connect to? I guess that's what I don't quite understand where we're at.
Something to that, but you're correct. So the reason we talk about them at substations are at the border between
high voltage transmission lines and low voltage distribution lines that go to homes and businesses. And so if you're at a substation, you are at a place where there is already a connection to that high voltage line. And so that's why I have no idea what the grid layout is around here, but you probably can't put 10 megawatts out there, I'm guessing, because you're on like some low voltage distribution line. It will probably not take 10 megawatts. And that's why you can't, it would be prohibitively expensive and the permitting would be impossible to like put a 10 megawatt or say a 20 megawatt battery here and then run a high voltage line over to join with the rest of the grid. So that's why the places that these can be, the big ones can be sited are limited to the substations. As you get, correct me and add, please.
No, you're absolutely right. What I just want to add to it is that I think your question goes to the about siting of these projects, right? In general, like why they're cited at the where they
I guess
are.
I'm looking to see whether
So-
our strategy is, one big one, many small ones.
So it all depends, and it's never random. Before the developer chooses a site for particular amount of megawatts, there's a study performed with the utility that takes sometimes 6 months, sometimes a year, and it's never random. Oh, let's just put 100 here and 20 there. No, it's a whole process which I cannot tell you about. Maybe you can know more about it, but it takes a lot to find a particular site that's going to work and help the grid.
Yeah, and then there's also, we can think of two different grids. There's transmission infrastructure, which is like the long distances of power across the state. That's typically from Western New York into the capital region, upstate New York, upstate New York, into the Hudson Valley, and then all going down to New York City and Long Island. That's where we typically hear congestion, and that's where that infrastructure is, transmission infrastructure. So the very, very, very big ones, 250 megawatts, I guess is what we're here to talk about, that you need transmission. So the number of places where you can site something that big are very few and far between, but they are all along the transmission corridor. So, whoever is citing those is probably going to have a lot of folks who are saying, this area is perfect for what I'm trying to develop. And that is just comes with the territory of being host to transmission infrastructure. The question of, do we want one big one or, a bunch of little ones or some medium? And, I don't think anybody in this room stands to benefit more than me. If you just had one giant one in the center of the state, nobody's anywhere near it. I could say in Brooklyn, we don't have to talk about this at all. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So we do need the large ones on the transmission network, and that offsets the need to build new transmission, which is far more expensive. So that's ratepayer dollars. Also on the distribution network, that's where you start to see more substations. You're typically getting 5 megawatts and below. So you have these smaller, but still supporting the grid that are more at the town level and not on the transmission network. And then what we see coming down the pike, and NYSERDA's incentive program is geared around this. We start to see residential too, little power walls for your home battery. And the utility is going to be able to send out price signals to a centralized aggregator. So your battery is going to power your house, but it's also going to be in a portfolio of smaller batteries. And then the way that you make money as a homeowner off those batteries, like how solar reduces your bills, the aggregator is going to get a signal from the utility. Say, push all the power onto the grid right now. We need it at this moment. We're getting close to rolling blackouts or whatever it is. And then that's also when the power is worth the most to you, the homeowner. So then you capture your investment and start making money. So it's all of the above. And they all have very different roles to play. But typically, the very, very big ones, you are only going to see that on the transmission network.
We visited the Warwick plant that caught on fire. And that plant is located right on Warwick Middle School's property. We went there, it's 10 containers, and it's 8 megawatts is the whole size there. It went on fire. Two of the containers, one started on fire, spread to a second container. And when the fire department got there, the answer was retreat. You don't do anything. School wasn't in session that time, it was over the summertime, with the staff working in the building. had to leave, and the fire lasted 2 or 3 days. We asked the superintendent of grounds what the cause of the fire was, and he said rainwater seeping in there. And we asked them also, so they actually put in new centipedes models in that area, and we asked them, like, how do they now, are we different? Now they have water sensors inside the containers. I mean, you mentioned before that water and electricity doesn't mix. Water and lithium, even worse mixed. You know, so in other words, even if you have a sensor inside there, as long as there's water inside there, having an explosion and having a fire with lithium being there is now increased tremendously.
First, lithium salt is what is reactive with water. This is lithium metal, so it's not reactive with water. Second, rainwater was the cause of that, sure, but due to a manufacturer's defect. There was something that was supposed to be watertight that wasn't, which is what the root cause analysis for that fire showed. The manufacturer has since corrected that manufacturer's defect and basically recalled the product and then pushed out a new one. And then, Paul, weren't you there while it was on fire?
I was, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that, that's required in 9540 is a rain test. They have to be compliant to the rain. I've actually seen it performed at a national recognized test center. When they actually put a ton of rain on it, right, they try to simulate rainwater coming down in a pretty heavy amount to make sure that no water gets on the inside of the actual enclosure. That's a NEMA, National Electric Manufacturers Association code compliance. But that's again built into the whole 9540. But yeah, they're not supposed to have rainwater in there. It's not supposed to happen, right?
This is what was guaranteed.
Well, here's my thing is during that Warwick is I took a look around myself. And this was during the commissioning phase. So was there? It wasn't even online yet. Was there people that were maybe installing it that had left something open? I don't know how the water got in there. No one knows how the actual water got in there. But yeah, that was definitely a one-off on that end. But I can tell you that no one was hurt. They actually did a swab test of the classrooms that were adjacent to it and came up with no contamination inside the school itself. We can go back to sheltering in place. Works really well. And that's all available. It was available online. I don't know if it still is. It's still available online. You can take a look at that. They did a swab test of the classrooms.
We also noted to down there, we had a decibel reader. And the thing is, it measures those 10 containers measure 62 decibel levels. That's 10. We're talking about 200, we're talking about 300 containers.
Yep.
All right, 30 times more than that, with the decibel level being, who knows how high it's going to be. That's going to be a constant hum there.
That's a local thing where they may have their own ordinance on sound, on noise. Yeah, there has to be a study done. There has to be a study done.
The study is always done by the developers.
Has to be.
When you do a study after you build it, or you do a study before?
No, they do before, and then they can mitigate it by providing some sound barriers
And trees.
And
Trees also.
So it's interesting. I wonder how loud it really is. They already have some
I
barrier
mean,
walls in.
60, 70 decibels, it's like a regular AC unit, but usually you don't have all of them going at once because, right, they cool each, they'll maybe you can,
It's where you measure, right? It doesn't matter how loud it is inside the middle of the containers because nobody should be there. You're not allowed to be there. You shouldn't be able to get in there. So it's a moot point. What matters is as measured from the nearest occupied community building. That's the language that we use. And then noise ordinance, our zoning, this is not something we deal with this fire code. This is entirely under local control. So if you want to say locally, we don't want to exceed 50 dBA, 60 dBA. Our NYSERDA model law recommends 60 dBA as measured from the nearest community occupied building because that's where it makes a difference. Yeah, so then you would say 60 dBA as measured from 300 feet away. And then, they have to do that to get their special use permit. And if they don't, then they can't build a project.
Well, there were projects that exceeded that decibel level that was turned down. This place turned down because of the high noise content.
From the beginning, they have sound abatement walls in their plan, so they know there's noise coming from it, right? Question is, what's the dB level at the nearest residence? And that's something that we measure. And it's a good thing to bring up to the town.
Yeah, the thing, it's measured after you built the,
No, they can't get the permit for that.
how do you measure the sound?
Mike, okay,
Does it make the sound up?
let this gentleman speak. He's got a quick
Is
question.
there a need to contain suppression water for an active fire?
Great question. Yeah, that's a really good question. This is one of the things that goes to the defensive strategy with the fire department. We really would like them to try to put any type of fog nozzle, right, a spray, sort of like a rain spray, on the exposure as opposed to the one that may be on fire. First of all, they're watertight. They really are going to be hard to get water on the inside of it. But there have been ones where they actually put the water on it itself. They did measure the water. They didn't come up with anything that was contaminant. As a matter of fact, down in California, they made them capture the water, gallons of water. EPA tested it and said, okay, you can release it. There's nothing of concern here. That was EPA that did the testing. So that was just something that we were involved with. We didn't put the water on it, but it was measured by the EPA, and they released the water from that end. So, and there's also been testing, right, as a result of the incidents that took place.
Yeah, especially the one up in the Thousand Islands area, that had a very, very pervasive use of private groundwater wells as the source of drinking water in that community. So New York's Department of Environmental Conservation was up there testing that well water for months, repeatedly just doing it over and over and over again, even though there was nothing the first time while the fire was actually burning of concern. They said that that's not even good enough. They kept taking tests for months, did not find one result that caused them any concern, did not find one result that caused anyone in that community to alter their behavior around their private wells. There was just nothing there. So we hear that a lot, and it's just another one of those things where I hear it all the time, but nobody can tell me why they're worried about it. There's not one piece of evidence in the world that would suggest that that is a cause for concern. There are also outlying situations. We had to deal with Suffolk County Water Authority. Actually, it was Nick Warner. And so Suffolk County, if folks aren't familiar with Long Island, they had industrial pollution that ruined one of the most pristine aquifers in the country. It was an underground aquifer. It was, I think, Northrop Grumman and Bethpage Farmingdale. So they have this history of industrial pollution in their groundwater. So they are hyper vigilant about this anywhere you go on Long Island. So we had to call the Suffolk County Water Authority, and they were saying, they're trying to build a battery near one of our main reservoirs. And in that context, we said, you know what, it's probably not going to be necessary, but there is such a thing as an abundance of caution. So you might want to build a retention center for suppression runoff in that case where you are dealing with kind of a hypersensitive community at a strategic location. Just to, even if you don't need it, that's a great thing, but just, to put people's minds at ease more than anything. So yeah, every once in a while, I think there are circumstances where you kind of just want to bite the bullet and do that. But I don't think we've seen anything that would suggest that that is necessary and broadly applicable to this technology.
Mike, two questions. So the township that potentially allow one of these in, how are they guaranteed that that community or the surrounding communities benefit from that and it's not going elsewhere?
You want to take that one?
Yeah, you can take it.
There are a few ways to do that. Let's start with the easy one. So for 5 megawatts at distribution scale, that's typically that operates on the same model as community solar. So the way that sells power is people are subscribing to that and they get bill discounts in the community. For the larger ones on the transmission system, what you're seeing is these tremendous ratepayer savings across the state. So the most recent modeling done on this is $2 billion by 2030. If we were to meet our 6 gigawatt goal, we save $2 billion statewide in ratepayer savings. So there's some that is kind of gamified in a way where you subscribe and then you see that directly on your bill discount if you're interested in doing this. There's others that's much more abstract. It's much more removed from you, where you will just see your utility rates not climb as quickly as they otherwise would. But then it's really hard to know that because you don't know how quickly they would climb if you've avoided that. There's also a similar phenomenon on the distribution network whereby utilities make money by taking 11% profit, which is the state number, on all capital expenditures on their system. So if utilities aren't building these, so you have private developers coming in, building, investing capital, and they're building those. So you're also avoiding distribution costs. Your local rates are going down because the utilities aren't saying we need all the ratepayers for this new infrastructure because another party has already paid for it. So there's a lot of ways that can happen. Are there still going to be benefits going to the shareholders that run the company that's developing? Of course. But there's also, in terms of benefits to communities, I think with solar and storage in particular, and wind, we see much more making its way back into the community than we're used to seeing with other types of development, and especially with other types of energy infrastructure.
I'll add one thing to that, which is $2 million is, across the whole state. But if you remember from the map of New York, it's divided into zones. And so wholesale prices are set in these different zones. And so if there is a lot of battery storage built in Zone G, we will feel that in our prices that we pay in Zone G. It won't be savings that will accrue to someone up in Buffalo. So it's not that, like, if I build a battery in my town, I will, other than the sort of community solar model or subscribe, if I build a big battery in my town, that it will go only to my town. But if Zone G, we build a good number of these things, we will all feel the benefit.
The other thing that kind of dovetails off that, so all of our inspectors are code enforcement guys. They, kind of up their credits every year. Not necessarily in this field. Is the state offering, some type of inspector or specialized training for them, or has it been talked about on the county level or with the supervisors? Maybe, we look at funding somebody who's well versed in this to be that inspector that goes between each project throughout the time.
So for Department of State's accreditations for code enforcement officials and building inspectors, NYSERDA has offered the battery storage training that is accredited. Because we're changing code, Veronica and Paul's team are actually working to update that. We're going to get that to Department of State to get that accredited as soon as it's ready. We're expecting late Q1, early Q2 of 2026. So it's around the corner. And the reason that I have had to travel New York State so much, so frequently, is because unlike most of those eligible trainings, ours is free to attend. So a lot of people will take it even if they don't expect to deal with their technologies. One, because it's interesting and you see it in the news and it's something to talk about. And two, because we are one of the few places where you can get that continuing education credit without paying for it. And that is a huge draw to people who are working in that field. So historically, yes. And that has been a particularly popular one among the CEU offerings from Department of State accredited courses.
And as far as the fire department trainings, it's by the developer, right?
Yeah, and then those inspections, when we wrote the code, when we were talking about that, what we would expect to see is a third party who is qualified to be vetting these systems. Thanks to our reinspection process, the way that we did that was ESRG led the reinspections, but we had every other inspections contractor on NYSERDA's payroll go with them. So now just to spread that knowledge to everybody who would be going out. So there are folks in New York State that are going to be, head and shoulders above the rest of the country on this technology, and they will be available. We want the developer to be paying for that, but it's ultimately on the AHJ to make sure that happens. So you can go to like a Labella, for instance, who are based upstate. You can go to these other contractors who have worked with us. And that's what we envision for the code requirement that we got placed into the 25 code.
if this gets approved for our district, you know, and we write, the town board writes everything proper, it would be in the plan that the developer pays every 3 years for a company to come in who's an expert at this, our local code guy, and give us that 3-year thumbs up. And the developer will pay for that, not the town, and we use those experts. So that's great. Okay,
Yeah, that's the system that we built.
right? We gotta make sure though it's written that they pay for it, you're saying.
It's a home rule state. So a lot of the times the system that we built is not the one that happens, which is just part of the territory that we're in. But that is what we intended when we made that requirement.
So the next question, not to monopolize, but the subject matter expert layer you have in New York City. So you essentially have designed into it that third party 24/7 versus every 3 years showing up. You know, it sounds like.
Yeah, FDNY requires that if there's any problems with the system, they go to the certificate of fitness person.
So outside New York City,
Every year.
outside New York City, are we supposed to have a third party being in that intermediate layer between us, or is it required, is it necessary, or?
I usually, sometimes you're gonna see developers that will supply their own people or a third party on their end. You have the right to ask the qualifications and things of that sort, right? To say, hey, what have you done? What do you plan to do? And kind of lay that out. So you have that right to do that. Ask them, but they may have their own people do it. Most people are just, they're farming it out to people.
And there is a maintenance to it, so when they're applying for the permit, they have to also provide you all the details about the maintenance and operation. It's not like they install it and goodbye, never see you again. They go and check on it, and they have inspections going on, so it's a living organism that has people work.
Yeah, they explain, at least this site here, they explain they have a call center 24/7. We would call directly to them, so there wouldn't be, that third party in between there offering trainings. They're offering the trainings now, though we don't even have this thing approved. If it does get approved, it's 3 years away at least, but they are being aggressive in trying to look good and trying to be helpful, and our job is, if it happens, we got to be ready for it. So, that's all,
So I would say a good practice would be that the subject matter expert have access to the battery management system for viewing purposes.
Okay.
So they can actually do it in real time while they're showing up, instead of, you got all these different people, and that's what FDNY just funneled it into, like, okay, certificate of fitness, you got it. Make sure you have access to the BMS. Make sure that you speak to the fire department when you show up. Make sure you're part of the decommissioning plan that takes place. Make sure you're part of the inspections that take place. Make sure that everything is inspected properly, getting all the paperwork, and all of this stuff, any repairs and replacement needs to come to us, and we're going to see you every year for the annual operating permit renewal.
And actually, one more thing, I think this is something that we didn't mention today, is that these incidents, they rarely happen right now. And that the deployment is just like skyrocketing, but the incidents are going down.
Very well.
No.
So that's a very important thing to knowledge as
So
well.
and again,
Because we're talking, sometimes I feel like these conversations like that, it's going to happen.
yeah, and
No, it's not.
the battery company has fed this, but my reply was, if my job is to respond to plane crashes, don't tell me, don't worry about it, planes never crash.
Exactly.
Our job is to
Yeah,
handle
no,
it.
of course.
So we have to say,
But we
if
fly
there's-
them, right?
right, if there's gonna be a fire there in
Yeah.
a container,
Yeah.
we gotta be like,
Yeah.
spot on, even though it might, quote, never
Oh,
happen.
trust me, I'm a mother of two toddlers, so now when I'm flying, I'm like, oh my God, I'll,
Right, so
changed.
our goal is to be successful.
Yeah, and I know I talked a lot about fire. I'm going to tell you this, the risk is extremely low, very, very low. But you're right? In the fire service, the only time we're probably going to show up as response is if has a problem.
Yeah.
We want to know what to do.
Yeah.
But you're gonna probably eventually just go through so many of these things if they're out there and you didn't know, like, I didn't even know that was a battery, or that was a battery energy storage. We did some training on it, but we never responded there once. And that happened, that's our goal, is to make sure that you're aware of it and hopefully you never have to go there.
The figure that's relevant, or a figure that's relevant, is from EPRI, which is they track every single battery incident in the country, and in the world. And the incidents, just from 2018 to 2024, so just in that 6-year period, the incidents of so the number of batteries deployed, you saw on the graphic, it's gone up exponentially. The rate of incidents of any kind over 6 years has declined by 98%. It's just like a straight line down. And the ones that are catching fire now are very often ones that were deployed 5, 6, 7 years ago, before new UL certifications were in place and before new fire codes were in place. So like, the analogy I like to use with people is like, it's as if on the roads today, alongside like modern cars with like crumple zones and anti-lock brakes and everything else, there were a fleet of Ford Pintos still driving around. And every once in a while, like one of those would burst into flames, and people who didn't know any better would look at it and say, oh my God, cars are death traps. Like, I'm never setting foot in one. So like the data, I mean, you're right, you need to be prepared for it, but the data matters.
I do want to follow up on that, right? There are states in the United States that have not updated their fire code. Bill mentioned something about 2018, that it doesn't really address it properly. There are people that are on the 2012 fire code. So they are really not getting the scrutiny, which is not good for the industry. So this is why we tell the industry, make sure you just build it to the current codes,
But
regardless. Go above and beyond what they're asking for, just regardless, do that.
Usually developers do it because of insurance requirements, so.
Bill, can you comment on the model, NYSERDA model law, and how much of a living document is it for the towns to leverage in their local use?
Sure. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, in the Energy Storage Guidebook for Local Governments, there is a template local law that you can use. As I've said multiple times tonight, New York is a home rule state. So the idea of the state handing you a law that is designed to leverage your home rule powers might seem a little silly at face value. So to Joe's point of how much can that be tailored by local communities, infinitely. It is there to give you guidance where you want guidance, where you need guidance. It is there to give you an idea of the things that you need to think about and how we at the state recommend that you think about them. But there is absolutely nothing there that cannot be changed, cannot be modified, cannot be deleted. You can add whatever you want as long as it isn't duplicative with fire code. So that is really, think of it as a baseline. So that's what we have. Here are the things that you need to think about. And we're not trying to micromanage how you think about them. All we are doing is showing, we've talked to various folks in this field over several years, and here's the consensus that we've all arrived at. And that's including fire safety experts. That's including land use experts, like PACE Land Use Law Center's executive director has been NYSERDA's main subject matter expert, Jessica Boscher, going back to 2014 on all of this stuff. So it's a whole host of folks who are deeply involved in the subject matter. Here are their recommendations. But if your planning board or if your constituents are not going to go along with what's in that template, it is completely under your authority to modify it however you see fit.
If I can add one thing to that, which is, so I live in the town of Poughkeepsie. We had a moratorium on battery storage deployment for about 18 months. During that time, town board members and fire chiefs and others were learning about the technology, getting comfortable with it. And in September, we withdrew the moratorium and put in place new zoning laws. The new zoning law, Bill was on the conference call with the planning committee. So it started from the New York Model Code. And then the planning committee modified, and it was like an open conversation with NYSERDA, literally in the meetings, to modify that. And so it's in some ways tighter or more strict, more difficult to meet than the New York State Model Code, but it was with input and just help from NYSERDA, and that helped bring the town of Poughkeepsie sort of over the line to feel completely comfortable with this.
So I'll just say, this just goes from a policy local law. If you have a 3-lot subdivision in our towns, you get 50 people out at your town board and your planning board meetings objecting to it. So me personally, I think these battery energy storage systems should be regulated from the state because they will not get done in local meetings. And I'm not trying to be negative, but you know, I sit in that chair and we get beat up for every little project. We had a solar farm, our planning board approved, neighbors sued, the developer walked away. The state is great at saying, you know, we want this, but they don't let towns pass gun control laws. They don't let towns pass, you know, women's right to choose laws. Some things need to be done at the state level. They shouldn't be done at the local level. And if we really care about the environment and protecting it, laws like these, I believe, should be the state should draft laws for the local municipalities because they won't get done.
Okay, can I tell one more story that's like relevant? So it's during the time when the town of Poughkeepsie was considering ending its moratorium, there was a battery plates that had been proposed. It actually, the developer withdrew it because they couldn't get a good interconnection with Central Hudson. But there was strong local opposition. Right? That's why we had the moratorium that was renewed twice. People were in the meetings, they were angry, they were scared, right? And the town board majority that voted to enact the new zoning laws and repeal the moratorium, they really stuck their neck out. And just to be clear, like I was one of the ones advocating that they should put in these new zoning laws. And I was terrified that they would get voted out of office because of it, that I had like, and the minority on the board ran against it really hard in op-eds in the newspaper, in social media, in speeches. Like this was their main issue, is the town board is selling out your health and safety and putting you at risk because they have some agenda. I was really scared. So, you know, this happened in September, the election was in November, the majority not only won, but won by, expanded its margin by a lot. And so the lesson I took from that is there was a very vocal number of people who show up at a town hall. They are not representative always of the vast majority of voters. And as much as they like tried to make this the issue so this is just a thing to all the elected officials in this room is you might have less to be scared of than you think. Like the town board and town of Poughkeepsie, they really took their time and did their due diligence, and they did not go for, you know, they waited 18 months until they were really comfortable. They talked to Paul, they talked to Bill, they had, you know, expert input, but then at the end of the day, they did it in the teeth of like really strong opposition because they were convinced it was the right thing, and they were not punished for that. You know, there were a lot of people, angry people yelling at it, but it didn't show through in the polls.
But another point from a municipal
We're about
perspective.
We're about a tenth of the size of the town of Poughkeepsie too. A lot of
I
us
mean, it
municipalities, so it's
costs
not.
for you to adopt a local law,
Right.
right? Every town has to adopt its own local law. It's not cheap, especially if you have local residents that want you to keep your public hearing open and extend your moratorium and weigh in from your attorneys. So, you know, why don't all the towns just say, no, we don't want them, and force the state to
Should be a
give us
state law, in my
that
opinion.
we
It shouldn't be
work
town
with.
laws.
You know, home rule protects the local group so well. I hate to see it go away.
So there are a few things. There are a few things there.
In this case, your example is good, but
There's action you can take. So first of all, we hear home rule all the time in New York. Home rule is sacred. Home rule is sacred. Merits of that argument aside, home rule has not typically been used to regulate energy infrastructure at the local level in the recent past. We've had Article 10, which is how we have all of our fossil fuel. We have ORES, which is how we have transmission and renewables. It is actually the anomaly that we have total local control over energy storage systems. So that's point one. And I think point two, you know, what can folks do about this? One of the main places or one of the main entities that I think needs to hear that from their constituents is Association of Towns, Council of Mayors, those groups.
I think if folks are more vocal about that perspective to those groups, then you won't see such a one-sided discourse coming from them to say, home rule is the hill that we will die on. And then also, I think, the governor's office and folks who are connected and your legislature could also use that, because I think there is a tremendous amount of political capital at stake to make a move like that in the eyes of the folks who would have the authority to make that move. And I think I hear this all the time. From local decision makers who are either I'm agnostic to this, I just don't want to personally deal with it, or I'm for it, but I'm not going to risk my seat to implement state policy, or I'm against it, but it really doesn't matter that much what I think because I don't know that much about the grid. I just don't want to go up against my whole community. I hear that all of the time. And I don't think that those messages are making it into, those centralized places that tend to control the discourse in a democratic society. So if that is your opinion, I would encourage you to be vocal about that opinion to the folks who are at the center of the power structures, because I think that is how you start to change the conversation. And I can tell you, you're not alone in thinking that way. The thing I hear the most is, we'll never bend on ORES, home rule till we're dead. The thing I hear the second most is, would you please give me some political cover so that I can feel? So, it is.
Well, we're not the experts, the state's done a lot of this work.
Sure, and a lot of the work that the Fire Safety Working Group did was to try to grapple with that reality of, we can't expect 1,600 jurisdictions to be chemical engineers overnight in the time that we need this development to happen. So we had to centralize it. That's why we built the peer review in the state infrastructure. That's why we amended the fire code, which is state law without the need for local adoption. That's why we hit those strong centralized places with the Fire Safety Working Group to do exactly that, to try to bring it all in one, try to make the most of every hour that we spend at work in terms of the impact that it would have on this industry in New York. And that's been our strategy this entire time.
Thank you. You have one more last question, Manna.
Given how cost effective and grid balancing battery storage is, that was brought out clearly in the Texas example, et cetera. Is New York State doing anything to help the utilities or the developers improve the grid and incentivize battery storage? What's being done in that regard? And I'm saying the state, not the federal government.
Is that camera still on?
Yes. DPS is working on this with the utilities. I think the utilities, because it is their network, because these are, quote, natural monopolies, have a very large say in what happens in their distribution networks. And that means that their shareholders and their C-suite also have a tremendous amount of say in what happens. I know that DPS is working with them to be able to address these issues, specifically the issue of, my project might be the last in the community, but that's the one that triggers the $2 million upgrade. We need to spread that out. It's not fair that one project should have to bear all of that. So there are a number of things being done. I think it's happening a little bit more slowly than a lot of us would like it to. I'm not sure what there is to do about that other than, it's DPS and the Public Service Commission that are ultimately the decision makers there. And I know that they, having gotten to work with them through the working group over the last couple of years, they're doing the best they can with what they have in the situation that they're in, like most of us. But I think that is one area where we could improve by a lot.
Well, all right. So I don't speak for anyone, so I can speak freely, which is utilities, like someone said before, they make their money by investing capital in infrastructure and then getting a guaranteed rate of return on that infrastructure. Batteries make it possible to do less of that, right? Utilities have an incentive not to want these, right? That's just like simple incentives. So I'm not attributing evil intent to anyone. I'm not, but just like the incentives of utilities are contrary to our incentives to not upgrade the grid more than we need to, right? And batteries are a tool for that. So, what you will.
Well, thank you guys for, we appreciate it. All Thank you.
There's a tree that's starting to fall. It's leaning on another tree, and if it falls, it's likely to hit one.
How are you?
So I don't know how often it's great.
Oh, the luncheon.
You're the right person for me to tell. I mean, we talked to the.
I think it was. There was a.
Code enforcement, but that's something that should be taken care of sooner than later.
Right, so that's the one.
I'm actually the county executive.
Oh, wow. Inspection.
You're hilarious.